I think what I take away mostly from the Commissioner's speech is there's always a lot going on. A lot of changes are definitely coming. We've heard that the Data Act is coming soon. Basically, we've already seen the adoption of the Data Governance Act, and there's a lot of discussions going on about new adequacy agreements. I think what we've seen in recent years is, especially in the context of international data transfers, we heavily rely on those adequacy decisions and the other tools in our GDPR portfolio to make international data transfers happen. But what we've also learned is that it's still it's still very difficult to transpose all the GDPR rules into practice. There are always new challenges coming on. New technologies are introducing us to new questions even regarding the GDPR implementation. And so again and again, the question has come up whether the framework that we do have with the GDPR needs improvement or needs change even. And I'm very glad that I have Axel Voss here with me today to discuss exactly that. Axel Voss is a member of the European Parliament. I think all experts from the data protection community know you, Mr. Voss. It's very great that you agreed to talk about the GDPR environment now, but also the changes that you would like to see in the future from your experience as one of the most important Parliament members for the data protection community. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Mr. Voss, what I would like to explore a bit with you is how we can improve the regulatory framework that we have to make it a bit more innovation friendly, to make it easier to implement the rules in practice. Because we have also heard from Susanne Demel earlier that companies are still kind of struggling. Nearly 5 years after GDPR came into force, companies are still struggling with the framework. And I know that you are at the forefront of developing new ideas regarding exactly that problem. So maybe you could start with explaining what you would like to see in the future. What should be done better?
So I see a lot of problems on more than less, let me express it in such a way, and on 5 levels. So at first, we do not have a kind of a unified application throughout the EU. So this is creating already some problems, and the EDPS and the EDPB, so the European Data Protection Board, etc., they are not doing the job quite good enough. So that's why I would say we have to improve the situation there. On the second level, I see missing guidelines or too complicated guidelines. And also this is something what you can easily probably improve if you have the intention to do so. And what we should have in mind always, if we are coming to the data protection authorities, they are just concentrating on data protection. They are not concentrating on what all the companies are concentrating on competition. And so data is more than less a kind of a good, or became a good. And that's why we have some conflicts of interests here. So a third level then, from my point of view, is also that we should come up and very surgically, we should more clarify the legal text. And we know now the problems and we should come forward with it and so on. On a fourth level, I see more the adaptation of new technology. So it doesn't make sense to come again and again with a new legal instrument and explaining here as lex specialis, sorry, and therefore we should more add something to the GDPR from my point of view and making it more precise. To be we never discussed during the negotiations of data protection, we never discussed blockchain, we never discussed artificial intelligence, we never discussed really the platform situation. And this is creating a lot of practical problems for the one who is using or deploying these. And of course, at the end, on the fifth level, from my point of view, I would say, if we are thinking or discussing about structures and the fundamental principles in the GDPR, we have or should ask ourselves, is a data minimization as a principle, I think in Article 5, is this still a kind of a principle in a data-driven world? Using data for just one purpose might also be not the best way forward in a data-driven world. And and if you're then thinking on the future in the metaverse, how will you still give a kind of a consent to every single issue what you probably will meet as? So we have to adapt these new technologies. We have to come forward and to correct probably some principles or clarify these. And this is how I'm seeing all these problems with the GDPR. And it's, of course, privacy shield. You mentioned these for the exchange of data between the US and EU. This has to be a kind of a valid legal fundament at the end. And so therefore, there's a lot what we can improve, we should improve, but also having in mind how important data protection at the end is for the individual. But only concentrating on these is, for me, in the data-driven world, giving up the competition.
Improving the regulatory framework seems like a very daring task, though. We've discussed whether the GDPR itself should be amended or whether new regulation can lead to a more functioning environment. And Commissioner Reinders said a lot about the upcoming proposals for the new data economy or new data innovations. We know that the AI Act, for instance, is coming up as well. We're still waiting for the privacy regulation. It has been in discussion for more than 5 years now. If I remember correctly, the first proposal is from January 2017. Do you think if those new regulations enter into force in Europe, they will have an impact, or they will change the data economy for the better, making it more easy for data innovations to be developed here, or do you have other suggestions regarding the improvements?
Yeah, good question, and very hard to answer in a very clear way. So if we are coming to the Digital Market Act, for instance, they are saying, oh, we do not want to touch the GDPR, and it seems everything is fine. But then they are coming with a kind of a regulation of consent all of a sudden. So this means at the end, you, as a company, you have all of a sudden the DPA, so the data protection authorities, and the market competition authority in place for the same subject. And this is not really simplifying the life of companies, and this is what I'm criticizing. Everyone is then saying in these new legal tools, oh, please do not touch the GDPR. But at the end, they are creating a little bit differently and not having the same definitions and interpretations and so on. And this creates a lot of confusion. For the AI Act, probably it might be better to have a kind of a lex specialis and saying how we would like to deal with the data there, if we're coming to sandboxes and so on. But e-privacy, I would say it would be better to integrate this in the GDPR. So all of a sudden, there you have a different legal tool with an own definition and might be interpreted differently because it's now a kind of a different authority, probably. And so this is what I would consider would be better to implement this internally in the GDPR, that you have the same definitions, the same lines to take, and so on. And but let me add also one aspect regarding e-privacy, because you mentioned it. I would consider our common point or common approach in the parliament, and also probably with the council 5 years ago is, it's more than less a century in the digital world. So we should more reconsider if this is still right, what we have done there, and if this is appropriate and adequate still to these times. So, but it's I hope that the parliament position is not coming into life. Otherwise, I would consider this means this is the end of digitalization in Europe. It's a little bit exaggerated, of course, but I would consider that we should more update the position for e-privacy and the position of GDPR and adapting these to the new situation we are into. And also we should be a kind of a flexible legislator and not doing here something where we all then might fulfilled with joy when we come to an end to this, but then seeing 2 years later, oh, there might be another problem and we should update these, and not saying, oh no, we just started with it and so on. We should be more flexible and, as a legislator, also more speedy.
More flexibility and more speed in regulation. It seems nearly impossible to do that. But I really hope that new regulatory approaches will achieve what you just said, because we have seen again and again that the regulation that we have and that is already been proposed is often too narrow and doesn't seem as innovation friendly, as open to new technological developments as they should be. As you said when we were discussing the GDPR many years ago, blockchain wasn't really a topic there. I mean, we sometimes talked about AI, of course, but not in a way that we really all try to build that into the legal text. And I think we all see the consequences now. Well, I also think it's really important that you said we need a discussion about what principles are here to stay and what principles should maybe be amended in additional regulation that has already been proposed. Because I think it's a valid point to say data minimization and purpose limitation also kind of antagonistic even to new data developments, but that doesn't mean that we need to overhaul the whole of GDPR. And I think finding the right balance between those ideas will be of the utmost importance. And I can imagine it's quite a difficult discussion to have in the Parliament. Maybe just also for our audience, because you mentioned regarding e-privacy, you wouldn't want to see the text that the European Parliament has written. I think it was also in 2017. You were quite fast. That you wouldn't want to see that come or be the proposal in the end. So you think it should be amended again before it enters into force, or there should be another discussion on the legal text of the privacy regulation?
Yes, so the e-privacy regulation is concentrating on data which are transferred from A to B. And the GDPR is concentrating on data what might be processed in one location. And so, of course, this has to be interlinked somehow. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to have all these separately done. That's why I think, because of the since 2017 different digital world, we should more have a kind of a close look in what is still functioning and what not. And here are the politicians are being, I would say, the biggest problem in this area, because there is no political will to opening very surgically the GDPR or the e-privacy, and there is no political courage also to do so. And in the parliament, we have a majority in saying, do not touch the GDPR, this is our gold standard, and that's why this is so fantastic, we can't even discuss it. So, and this is a totally, from my point of view, a totally wrong approach, because the digital world is so changing, and that we can't really have the expectations that this won't affect also our legal tools here, our legal instruments. And therefore, I'm still a fan of saying we should be more realistic, look to the reality, and also what does this mean for our principles, for our way forward, for our legal tools. And also having in mind, so because we named the data minimization and the purpose of processing, and also data deletion might be a kind of today in throwing away resources. So that's why we should have in mind that data is really a kind of the new gold or oil or whatever. And of course, nobody would just throw oil away or gold away, and we are doing this day by day. So this is what I'm meaning. So we are seeing how important data are, and we are treating them in a way of the last century.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that assessment. And I also think another very valid point that you've made is the regulatory framework needs to take into account what's happening in the real world, basically. And in digitalization, we often realize that the innovation cycles are very, very fast, and our current regulation doesn't really seem to catch up. And that is definitely something that needs to be amended. I think what you said earlier, that the 5 years we've been discussing the privacy regulation is basically a century in the digital ecosystem, is absolutely true, because we need to work faster when regulation is being proposed to give companies the legal security also to deal with the new opportunities, but also challenges that they find in the market, and the new technological framework that they want to use, but they don't dare to if they're not secure. They'll not be fined for that as well. Coming back to one other point you mentioned earlier, because I think it's very, very important. You included the DMA into our regulatory overview just now. So the Digital Market Act is definitely more like a competition regulation, and not really, but kinda, as it's very, very focused on the largest companies, the largest platforms, especially, and their dealings in the market. And you mentioned the challenges the DMA will pose, as also the DSA, for the data protection authorities and other authorities as well. And I think we should explore that a bit further, because as far as I understood it, the data protection authorities will definitely be involved in the assessment of data processing that is now restricted under the DMA, and also the DSA, but the competition authorities, of course, will be involved as well. So what would that really mean for the companies in your view?
Probably more supervision, scrutiny situations by the authorities. And this is what I would always consider should not happen. But they, in the digital market, they created a small sentence regarding the consent to something, meaning probably in the competition relation, but all of a sudden you have this consenting with the GDPR and the competition issue more than less in confronting each other, and this might lead to a situation where the competition authorities might interpret this differently like the data protection authorities. So, and here we have to be very careful. But because of these new elements, we created with the GDPR a mentality in saying, please be careful at first, and secondly, more than less, as for the single person, do not share or be careful in sharing and so on. And now we are coming with two elements couple of years later, where we are saying, oh, data sharing might not be the worst idea. So that's why we created the Data Governance Act and the Data Act. So where we are all of a sudden saying, oh yes, we have to motivate everyone to share data, that we can also have a kind of a better competition, and that we're coming forward with new knowledge and so on. And this is something where I would consider is so stupid at the end. We are seeing already that we are lagging behind. Also, if we are coming to the situation, to the AI Act, we are asking for wonderful results, hopefully 100% error-free and so on. And it should be non-biased, non-discriminatory, and gender balance and so on. But we are not providing the data for it. So this would mean at the end we are creating probably algorithms what are not fulfilling the expectations of a legislator. And this means we are also lagging behind to this. And the next disruptive step, the metaverse, then you have to have data, you have to have AI, and all of a sudden we are seeing we are totally out of the digital development, and as Europeans. And this is what I would like to hinder, or what I don't like to see, that we are not doing enough as politicians, as a legislator, in promoting also the European industry for it to be a part in the digital developments. And also, and this leads me always to the question, how we will survive as Europe in a digital development.
So it's definitely a matter of competitiveness, right, for us all, so for the society, but of course also for the companies that are trying to build innovations in Europe and export them around the globe. So I think it's a good example that you're making, because it shows that data and the competitiveness really work together, or they should work in tandem to enable the European market. And I always think that regulation is definitely one of the cornerstones of that development, because we need legal certainty. We know that we also need several rules to restrict certain mechanisms, certain behaviors, certain data processing as well. but not too much. And this not too much, I think, is the most difficult task of it all. And I also think the other point that you made regarding the incoherence between the regulatory proposals when it comes to the definition for consent, but also other definitions that are in the legal text will become more and more of a problem, because the more regulation that is that enters into force for the European market, the more those incoherences work against competition in the end, because it not enables the companies but disables them, at least to some extent. Let's try to find like at least a bit of a solution for that problem, because we've talked about the regulatory proposals that we already do have in the market and that are already in discussion. What would your wish be for the future, for future regulation, to be a bit more of an enabler for the data economy and for innovation? What should happen, and maybe what do you want to do? Because you are a particularly important player in the whole discussion. You are at the forefront in the European Parliament. So what do you want to do?
So I more than less expressed my will and also the will of the Parliament in the so-called AIDA report, where we are trying to create a roadmap for the surviving of Europe in the digital age. And here we put a lot of things into the text where I would consider this is what the Commission should do at the end. So at first we need a kind of a plan, and the plan means not coming with one legal tool after the other. It's more a kind of a plan how we can promote the European industry, and Europe has to or can provide to the world a lot in this combining values to technology. But we have to be as fast as other regions in the world in developing. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. So, and to come to this point, we have to think about not only on these infrastructure issues, skills, probably also on patents, and a lot of money we have to invest, and cybersecurity, in installing cybersecurity, and so on and so on. And there's a lot to do. And but also we need this political will, the change of mindsets in the heads of our national leaders, that we can create more European projects. I do not see that we are able, as a kind of a member state or one single company, can really compete still to Google, Facebook, or the Chinese big companies and so on. So I think we have to join forces in Europe, and therefore we need to create a platform where we can have this joining of forces, and that we might also have these, in addition, the funding by member states and so on, that we can still play a role. We have very intelligent experts in Europe, but if we are then considering the brain drain, what is happening, and also we should stop this in a way. But therefore you need better conditions, you need a kind of an environment what is more inviting, and not where we can only see problems over problems. So this is a kind of an environment we have to create. But we need this political will in surviving, this concept, and then a lot of money, and then we might go.
I think that's an excellent point to make as well. in the end, we definitely need money and funding for different purposes. Really, we absolutely need the funding for the authorities to enable the data economy as well. Because what we have always found is that, especially a data protection authority that has enough funding and therefore enough personnel and experts internally, they are more willing, because they do have the time to help companies find ways for innovation and new data processing tools and so on and so on. So I think that's an important pillar, but absolutely in the competition framework, we do need funding as well. We've often discussed this, especially in the context of the Digital Markets Act, whether only restricting the biggest companies will be enough in the end, because only restricting them will not enable the smaller ones automatically. And if we want to enable especially SMEs in the European market, I think they do need funding, but also regulatory help. So if maybe a bit less restrictive rules, more help from the authorities, and so on and so on. And absolutely, I think one of the last points that you made regarding the brain drain, that is something we definitely need to address. But it's very hard to do so, right? Because you cannot really put that into legislation or anything. You really need to build an environment to keep people and experts and knowledge here. If you have any ideas on how we can do that, feel free to share them as widely as possible, because I think it's one of the most important aspects in the end, to have the right people here in Europe to work together, right?
Yes, you're totally right. We have to attract these experts, that we are creating for them a kind of a good atmosphere, good environment for research, for testing, and so on. And of course, again, the question of money. But politically, I would say we need also to concentrate on priorities. And of course, AI should be a priority, because this is, so we have called this in a way booster for digitalization. And that's why we should concentrate on AI. But then, of course, if this at the end might be the self-driving car, or green tech, or smart farming, or whatever it is, blockchain, or 3D printing, but we should pick something where we can also be a leader. And this would be, I think, one point where we should concentrate on it. We do not have to choose only one priority. We can have more, of course, but it doesn't make sense what we are doing right now, where every member state has its own digital strategy or own AI strategy and so on. It doesn't make sense. It's wonderful that we are creating a lot of good ideas probably and good use cases, but we have to combine this somehow, that we will also be in a way in a leading position. So far, we are totally not.
Absolutely. It all comes back to this grand European idea, right? So we need to work together. We need to prioritize also together. We need to think together to enable a true European strategy that involves all member states, all future potential member states as well, to be part of the evolution. And I'm really glad that you are working towards that goal in the European Parliament. I think we also, of course, always need to involve all the other stakeholders on the political level, but also in the industry, because we always see kind of the same thing in the company's ecosystem, because some ideas are developed in several member states at basically at the same time. And I think we would be much faster if we would try to bring the ideas and the experts together to work on the common goal, and not have the resources spent again and again and again if we are truly working on the same idea at the same time. So I guess there's still a lot to do. That's what I absolutely take from our talk. But I think it's absolutely amazing that you mentioned so many important aspects that need to be taken into account when we are talking about the regulatory environment. Because it's in the end, it's not only about the GDPR, right? There are so many other aspects that we need to discuss and find ways toward the future. Maybe one last wish from your end, coming back to the prioritize aspect that you mentioned. What is your priority right now?
So the priority right now is AI. So because if we are not doing the AI in a proper way, then I would say we can give up in a way. So I know this is also exaggerated a bit, but if we are considering AI as a booster for digitalization, then we should be part of it. But if we are approaching these, what some colleagues or a lot of colleagues unfortunately are doing, approaching these as a kind of a consumer protection law, then we are lost. We have to find this balance in saying we do not want to harm someone, but we have to enable and invent here or supporting the invention of AI better, but also giving some balances. And also, if we are looking to some technologies, what are considered in the parliament extremely dangerous, like facial recognition, this is something what I would say, we are already much further developed. We have privacy tech, what can create or what is deforming the faces so that no one can detect it except the machine at the end. So, but they are not open enough. So my wish would be a kind of changing of mindset or open-minded regulatory bodies. And that we also the politicians are more open-minded in better balancing.
More balanced and more open-mindedness, especially when it comes to AI. I think we can all agree to that. Thank you for sharing your views today, Mr. Voss, and kind of structuring what's going on right now. I wish you the very best of luck in all your efforts and all the discussions that are definitely yet to come. Hope to speak again soon. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you. It was a big pleasure.